And thank you all for having me this morning. It is actually an honor to be here. And Mrs. Steele, I've been admiring her for years. She's a fellow educator. And usually when I'm breaking a class in, I'll go around the class. But for the interest of time this morning, we can do that on the back end so I'll know who everyone is. Now, I was given a charge, and the charge was to speak about education, the gateway to opportunity. And before I even go into my spiel and what I'm going to talk about, I think all you have to do is look at the vice president nominee, and you will see what education does. And you can just look in the mirror yourselves, and you will know that education is the gateway to opportunity. And I would be remiss if I did not say anything about our president-to-be. I'm going to try not to be partisan, y'all. I'm trying not to be partisan, but our president-to-be, our MVP, our most valuable player, Vice President Kamala Harris, soon to be President of these United States. I don't know how much you know about me, but I was raised in Edgewood. Just want to tell you a little bit about that. My mother when she first brought me home from the hospital, Hughes Spalding, it was Summerhill, and you know Summerhill has changed some now. And if you go to 212 Flora Avenue, you will see my feet in cement, where my father, and you'll hear a little bit about him, placed me to put my feet in the cement. My mother and father were from South Georgia, and I want to give honor to the Lord and honor to my parents because they were my first teachers. And next to many of the teachers, and Mrs. Steele, you don't know this, I went to Whitefoot Elementary School. Y'all, this is not a part of what I'm going to present this morning. But many of my teachers were people like the Ruby Lucas, Bill Lucas' wife, and Sam Baycoat, and Mrs. Andrew Young, Andrew Young's first wife. They all taught me at Whitefoot Elementary School. And when Hank Aaron would come and visit our fourth grade class, and Joe Torrey, you know, girls, we weren't really into baseball. And years later, we started appreciating everything that these people who were our teachers in our community poured into us. So now I was taught over at Atlanta University in graduate school not to talk more than 20 minutes when you have adults in the room. And my sister reminded me last night, she said, now you know about that genie. I said, what genie? She said, the genie told the teacher that she had 3 wishes. And the teacher said, okay. Then my first wish is that all lawyers would disappear. There would be no more lawyers. And then the genie said, okay, your wish is granted. Now you don't have any more wishes. And the teacher said, no, I have 2 more wishes. And the genie said, well, sue me. Sue me. So in the interest of time, and so you all won't sue me, I timed myself last night, and what I have to say is 15 minutes if I talk fast. And I just used about 4 minutes up. So what we're going to talk about this morning is what works in education, what we know. Evidence-based research shows us and practice shows us what already works in education, regardless of what some of the politicians are saying and doing and some of the pontiffs and money makers are, and I call them change makers, and they're making a lot of change too, off the backs of our children in our schools. So we're going to talk about what works. We're going to talk about the impediments, who those billionaires are, and that dark money, and organizations that's been existing now for years to make sure that our great institution, public schools, are dismantled. And then we're going to talk about what we can do. If I can't answer a question, y'all, I'll try to get you the answers in the end. And then I'll make sure that we have some handouts up here so that you will have basically what I'm talking about. But this morning, we want to talk about the truth in education, and we want to make sure, okay? Amen. This is what we want to make sure of, Mrs. Steele, right? So we're going to talk about the truth in education. So you may already know this, but high school dropouts will earn an average of $200,000 more in their lifetime. High school graduates than high school dropouts. And according to the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, college graduates are half as likely to be unemployed than their peers, whose highest degree may be a high school diploma. And the median lifetime earnings, if we're just talking about money alone as a value, are $1.2 million higher for all of us who hold bachelor degrees. So we are going to talk about what works. And according to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, you'll hear me mention that again, there are 4 elements that work in any type of school. And when my mom came up in a one-room schoolhouse there in Wrightsville, Georgia, and switches in the corner, the pot-belly stove, you say, how old are you? She was born in 1914, and she had many change of life. But when she came up, these elements actually existed. They weren't formalized yet, but they existed. And all of those grades were put right there together, and they helped each other. And she said when she finished milking cows in the morning and pulling fodder for everybody that was raised on the farm, and she walked, she said 2.5 miles down a red dirt road. And many times her brothers could not go to school, just like my father could not, because in the springtime, you were expected to do what? Be out there planting. And in the fall, you had to be out there reaping. And we didn't have compulsory education then. We now have compulsory education. We have a lot of things working for us. And regardless of what the naysayers are saying, our schools work. They work. There's a lot of improvement to be done, but they work. So a strong, equitable public education system, as we, I think, can agree, is critical, both to ensure all of our children are prepared for life, college, and career, and to enable our country to achieve its potential as a vibrant democracy. And we know there are some folk that would like to destroy it. And an engine of economic opportunity and a global leader. How many of us went to a public school? Just raise your hand if you went to a public school. Okay, thank you. Every day in our classrooms across the country, teachers help move us toward these goals. Mrs. Steele can testify to that. But extensive improvements to America's education system are essential to help all students acquire the knowledge and skills they need for success in the 21st century. Our students must not only attain knowledge, but they must also be able to apply what they have learned. They have to collaborate, analyze, thinking skills, and they must have access to a curriculum that focuses not just on what is to be tested, but on what should be learned to make them well-rounded thinkers and individuals. And in order for students to do all of this, their teachers must receive adequate preparation, support, and development throughout their careers. Teachers have to do that throughout their careers and be given true voice in their workplace, as opposed to top-down management that usually come from states and bureaucrats, although God bless our states. Teachers are the ones, just like surgeons in the operating room, that knows mainly what students and families need. And they must be treated as professionals. But many of our educational policies, advanced by the federal government sometimes, and states like good old Georgia, and local governments, and by some school boards, have had negative effects on our community and our children, including the misuse of standardized testing, narrowing down our curriculum, placing emphasis on competition over collaboration. And my mom told me in that little one-room schoolhouse, they had collaboration. She didn't know what the word was at the time. And punitive accountability systems, I gotcha, instead of thoughtful accountability measures and supports that foster shared responsibility for student success. Someone asked me the other day about Dr. Beverly Hall, and I worked side by side with her when Atlanta was hailed as the cheating capital of the nation. It got a bad name. I remember when Reverend Andrew Young, and I don't know if you all know Aaron Turpo, but he was Maynard Jackson's chief of staff, held a big celebration for Atlanta. And one of the reasons is because cheating took place all over the country. And it was minuscule. And when you see those impossible standards that the government put up before us, then you will understand No Child Left Behind, No Child Left or Dime, what was occurring. All right, in addition, many of the educators we represent and our students, families, and communities we serve face additional challenges. And 3 million more children are living in poverty since the start of the last recession. And the achievement gap between children from high and low income families is now almost twice as large as the gap between black students and white students. And educators are struggling. I should put Latino students in there too. And educators are struggling to meet all of their students' increasing needs with fewer resources. Teacher shortages have become a critical issue across this country. When Mrs. Steele and I hope I'm not overusing your name, Mrs. Steele, when we went into the ministry of teaching, so many of our teachers do the same thing for the love of teaching and for the love of children. But they also have to be paid. They need benefits. And they need not wait until the end of their career to find out that their Social Security, if they paid into it, is going to be prorated. That's happening in 15 states. I know I'm getting off the subject. But we're trying to get that repealed. And that's called WEPPPO. I can talk about that after. And thank God that both of our senators have signed on so we can get that 1983 terrible thing repealed. So Georgia is a great state for business, but it's a terrible state to retire in. Teacher shortages have become a critical issue across the whole country for a myriad of reasons. We have many people who go into teaching because it's their next stop. We have teachers, sometimes the state will say, okay, we got a shortage of teachers, everybody come in, they lower the standards. And until we actually professionalize teaching, and we're going to talk about 4 things that the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development have found works everywhere. Then we will be just treating symptoms as we talk about how to alleviate and how to get rid of many of the problems that we have in our public institutions, period, not just schools. This climate is no excuse for not having a proactive education agenda, and in fact, this climate demands that we have a proactive education agenda. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the National Conference of State Legislators, NCSL. National Conference of State Legislators are a bipartisan group of dozens of state veteran legislators. Notice I said bipartisan. And legislative staff. And along with various private sector partners, they began about a 1.5-year study about 10 years ago. And they focused on the highest performing countries in the world in education that were developed countries. And they discovered the commonalities across their policies and practices. When I first heard that and I first read about it, a light bulb went off. And we saw some of the researchers and we met with some of the legislators who actually visited these countries. And they saw what actually worked in education. And I started wondering, I wonder how come our country or our states are refusing to do what we actually know works in education. So these legislators met with education leaders from these countries, along with national and international experts who study their school systems. And they also visited several countries to see the differences firsthand. Now, you may or may not have heard of Davos, that economic summit that's held in Switzerland every year. And usually, I'm trying not to be partisan, usually Republican governors don't go. Last year, 9 Republican governors went, including our governor. Our governor had already been there. And when our governor decided that he would push vouchers, which has been pushed for years, I texted him, and I had on a T-shirt that day. I said, Governor, we're going to fight you on this one. And he said, just like your T-shirt say, Ms. Turner, it's a great day. And so vouchers actually passed in Georgia, only with 1 vote. And shame on my fellow Democratic sister who gave him that 1 vote. So I asked the governor, and I still ask the governor, since you went to Davos, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development is a part of that. Then did you get an opportunity to see what really works in education? You know, this is as opposed to what the next business move is going to be. As we develop our workforce, as we develop our people to be leading citizens, and as we develop our young minds so that they will be leaders and so that we will have a democratic republic, which we're fighting for right now. These legislators visited several of the countries to see firsthand what happened and what was happening, and so they agree. The National Council of State Legislators, a bipartisan group, agrees with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The bad news is that, as you know, many of our state education systems are falling dangerously behind the world in a number of international comparisons and on our own national assessment of educational progress, which leaves our country overwhelmingly unprepared to succeed or to be competitive in the 21st century. But we know as Christians, this is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that the devil is a what? He's a liar. The good news is by studying these other high-performing systems, we are discovering what seems to work. And we've been doing some of them for years. And that's why we have so many of our great first responders, nurses and doctors, and we have so many people who service us successfully and keep the water clean. And these are all products, we are all products of the great American public school system. Common elements are present in nearly every world-class education system, including a strong early education system, a reimagined and professionalized teacher workforce, robust career and technical education programs, and a comprehensively aligned system of education. These elements are not found in our country in a consistent manner. State by state, there are differences. Well-designed manner as they are in high performance. Massachusetts, we see usually is touted as #1 in education. Did you know that the teachers are treated like professionals in Massachusetts as they are in Finland, which was 5 years ago #1 in education? And I know my colleague in the Georgia Association of Education had an opportunity to go visit. He said, "Vidalia, do you understand that the teachers are helping to make policy? That they're the ones deciding who should stay in the profession? They're the ones mentoring each other. They're the ones looking at the curriculum in the schools without walls and et cetera to serve a population of individuals. Singapore does the same thing. And so some of our high-performing school systems are doing the same things. So what are these commonalities and why aren't states compliant? And I'm going to give you 4. First, high-quality teachers who are developed and supported. I didn't pop out of Spelman College and with a certification in teaching as a teacher. It's impossible. Teachers help make me into a teacher. And we're constantly honing our skills, our pedagogy. So teachers are not made overnight. Their work is complex and their product, our children, invaluable. In our country, over half of our teachers leave the profession because of a lack of support, poor working conditions, and compensation, as opposed to also deprofessionalizing a noble profession. I notice I use that word noble. Next, number 2, we must have a broad curricula that develops and engages the whole child. Students need a rich curricula that ground them in literature, mathematics, foreign languages. I wish I knew Spanish. Physical education, the arts, health, history, civics. You see how important that is now, and science. As opposed to modern day witch hunts, book burnings, and divisive concept laws. That's the embodiment of the critical race theory conspirators. Third, We need and must have, and in some places we do have, community collaboration and shared responsibility. We've heard over and over it takes a village to raise a child, and indeed it does. The idea that through intellect, hard work, and determination, a dedicated teacher can single-handedly overcome the ravages of poverty, inadequate resources, and any other obstacles confronting disadvantaged students is unrealistic. I remember when President Carter's grandson was running for, I think it was U.S. Senate here. He could have been running for governor. It was governor. And President Bill Clinton came to town, and all of us were over at Pascal's. And he looked at us and he said, my grandchild, and by now she's probably teenager or grown, by the time she's 5 years old, we'll have 50,000 more words in her vocabulary than most children in inner city. And it's because of exposure. So there's a direct correlation between socioeconomic status and what children are able to know and be exposed to. This spring, and if you've ever served in any schools as a mentor, and they'll have career day, I was fortunate enough to be in some of the schools in my county, DeKalb, and I asked the 8th graders what they were doing during the summer. Nobody had travel plans. No one. I said, how many of you all have seen the ocean? Less than 5% of the 3 classes that I had. And those children had lived in New Jersey or New York. And we have, y'all know, all we got to do is travel like 4.5, 5 hours, and we see the ocean. And in fact, I was 21 before I saw the ocean. And my mother's from South Georgia. So when we take our children and expose them, we can teach them outside of school walls invaluable lessons and give them experiences so they'll get ideas as to what they want to do, and they'll discover who they are, and it will awaken things that are inside of them that they may not be exposed to in their community or in their schools. Poverty and hardship affecting students and their parents must be addressed to help our students succeed. That includes quality health care, such as the expansion of, there you go, as opposed to, and I'm not here to bash the governor, but as opposed to camp care. The money is there. This is a donor state. $88.5 billion of Georgia tax dollars are sitting right now in the federal government, waiting to come down so that all of us will have comprehensive health care. In 100 square miles in Georgia, going down 1675, y'all don't get sick because you may not find a hospital. Over 11 closed. So in our country, 16.4 million children, and it's rising, live in poverty. The poverty rates for African Americans and the Hispanic children even higher, 38.2% respectively. And suburban poverty has soared in recent years. Recent research by Harvard University political scientist Robert Putnam has exposed a persistent and troubling gap between the opportunities available to children of more affluent parents and those available to the children of the less affluent parents. So don't believe the hype, because I put my child in a charter school, they're going to do better. Don't believe that hype. Charter schools do as well as public schools, but they don't outperform them. And that comes, and I was going to get that later, I'm jumping ahead of myself, that comes from that liar, the devil. We know what the research is saying, and we know what's driving that agenda. Putnam found that less time with parents, less family income, and fewer enrichment activities add up to hugely unequal opportunities available to children of working class parents. Now, we say working class. Now, what about our parents who can't work? With implications for their educational, economic, and social prospects. One of the most effective ways educators have helped overcome barriers to student success is through legislation that we put forth every year, and they work, community schools, which harness community resources to provide services and opportunities that enhance students' achievement and well-being. This support can include academic enrichment programs, medical services, mental health services, not just for the students, but also for the community. food assistance, because I've been to some of these schools even out in the state of New Mexico, and they had gardens. Now, you know, Mexico's desert, right? But they had gardens, and the students took charge, and the special needs students, they took a lot of pride in making sure that when you came into their garden, you wanted something, you're going to help weed it out. And some of these stores that were inside of the city didn't have fresh vegetables, but you could go to those schools and find them. Some of those schools I went in, those community schools, the attendance went up because when the parents were sick, sometimes they couldn't get their kids to school, or the kids had to sit with the parents, or the kids get sick. They actually had freestanding, right there on campus, health clinics, so that you could get your vaccinations. You could come if you had a cold, and et cetera. Or you could come if you needed to see a physician or PA. That's what community schools are all about. Community schools have not only mentored students and mentor parents, and I was there one night in one of the schools. I spent about a week out there, y'all. And when I walked in a room like this, and they had white tablecloths, and there was actually cleaners there in the community that would take the white tablecloths weekly and clean them. And I wonder how all of these students are back in the evening getting help with their algebra, or with their reading, or with a science or art project. It is because the parents would come, and it will always be something that the parents were interested in, and they were fed on China. That's what a community school was doing. College counseling and a variety of social services are available through community schools. So this approach creates an environment where everyone can do their best, and kids are better able to learn, and teachers can focus more on instruction, knowing their students' needs and meeting their students' needs. Because, do I have anybody else who taught school in here? All right, so I'm preaching to the choir. The benefits of successful community schools include improved attendance, academic achievement, higher graduation rates, and rates of matriculation to post-secondary education. Increased family engagement, and healthier students, as opposed to vouchers. Here's the last one, the fourth one. You could do a dissertation on every one of these. Community partnerships. Public schools reflect our democratic republic. They reflect the communities in which they are located and where we live. They serve all of society, not just some of society. And they are accountable, as opposed to many of the schools where I might be paying a whole lot of money that's not accountable, okay? Therefore, all people deserve good schools, all people. High quality health care, safe neighborhoods, and decent jobs. So the larger community around, with their shared values, our shared values, and common goals, gain leverage to demand support and sustain reforms that will have genuine lasting impact. Every time I see that word demand, I think about Frederick Douglass, because he said power does what? Because he's nothing without a demand. Y'all got it? So why aren't states adhering to evidence-based practices and research that really works for high quality education? Y'all, again, I'm not being partisan here. But when I can look up on mainstream TV and see madness, let me interject this. 50 years ago today, Richard Milhous Nixon resigned as president of the United States. I remember my 12th grade project, and we were doing a debate on stage, and I had to represent Richard Milhous Nixon, and he was a Quaker, and et cetera, and I learned a lot about it. But if you look at Richard Nixon today, he would look like a left-winger. He came up with EPA. He talked about health care, but he also talked about living wages. Go back and look at him now. We remember that song, Tricky Dick, I'm out here. But anyway, so Richard Nixon did one thing that was honorable, although he was kind of pressed into it, right? He respected the Supreme Court and stepped down when he was caught. But when I look up today, 50 years later, and I see madness, and we have a nerve to debate and not call it out for what it is. Illness and sickness that does not even respect the United States Constitution. And a stacked court. Y'all, we won't be debating long if we allow our democratic republic to be taken away from us. So anytime somebody start debating, talking about, I said, look at the alternative, okay? So I do respect Richard Nixon for respecting the country. A lot of other things I didn't like about him, but I respect him for that. As opposed to folk who are about anarchy, confusion, and killing this great country that so many people envy right now, and the Lord has blessed us with. And now I'm going to do a little history, and I'm going to try not to bore you. In 1983, there was a report that came out, A Nation at Risk. It was considered a landmark publication in education during Ronald Reagan's administration. I want you to remember that document, A Nation at Risk. And the administration this report contributed to the growing assertion that America's schools fail. And it touched off a wave of local, state, and federal reform efforts without telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Dr. Prudence Carter, the former dean of the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley, says that the report was a pivotal moment in education policy, the beginning of a moment of angst about the state of our schools. The angst found expansion in the No Child Left Behind law in 2002 and the Race to the Top initiative in 2009, and is still enshrined in federal law today. Dr. Michael Petriel, former president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, calls the report a touchstone that promotes school choice, more testing. And this report is lauded by the former Secretary of Education, the billionaires herself, Betsy DeVos. Betsy DeVos, which was former Secretary of Education under George W. Bush, and many other billionaires, and I'm just going to put it plain, are behind the movement to destroy public education, control schools, control minds. Thus, opportunity, they will control. Their mission is to take over public schools, and guess what? Public school funds. Now, I can do a whole hour on that, but I won't go into it. Legislation such as vouchers, amendments that succeeded here in Georgia, and thank God that one that we beat. And one of the school board members said, all of us who were fighting that amendment, she said, we got to put y'all in straitjackets if you lose it. That was an amendment about 9 years ago. And the governor at that time, I call him Governor Let's Make a Deal. Y'all know his history in Congress and all. Decided that they were going to change the Georgia Constitution, and they did change it during the cheating scandal, whereas money, our money, your money, can go to any type of school. So that's why you have all these pop-ups coming around, because people that are looking for businesses and looking for opportunities and don't believe that their public schools work without putting in the hard work, invest in those type of businesses. Charter schools, by the way, was supported by the organization I'm in, American Federation of Teachers, a man named Albert Shanker. He's now dead. But it's not the type of charter schools that these businesses have come up with. Our charter schools are accountable. They ain't supposed to last forever. They were supposed to serve similar to community schools. And what we learned in those charter schools for those particular populations was supposed to be transferred to larger and bigger schools. But that did not happen. So billionaires saw a business opportunity. And we heard it out of Betsy DeVos's mouth. We got the recordings and all, what they were going to do. And so mainly what they did, they started concentrating on African-American communities, where usually, y'all know, we're eking out a living, we're busy. And then they started going through Teach for America and looking for talent and putting folk on school boards, such as in Atlanta. And those school boards brought in folk who had worked for Michelle Rhee, like Dr. Kostarfin. And one thing led to another. We even had honorable citizens in that business. in that business. Some of them are still in that business. But those schools now, we're supposed to be including everybody. When you look at those folks, the folk who are in those schools don't include everybody. They're really not mixed communities. They got a lot of partners, but mainly they are undergirded by our tax dollars. They decide who can go into those schools. They decide if you stay into those schools. And their standards and their transparency is not what our public schools standards are. So, now I just told you a little bit about Betsy DeVos and I got off the subject, but legislation such as vouchers are an extension or a manifestation of private school choice bills disguised as tax credits. In fact, over 90% of families whose kids are already in private schools, who can already afford private schools, receive the voucher allocations from that state. Texas defeated it last time. And in Georgia, I'm going to announce right now, we're going to start working on, and we've already started raising the bar, repealing some of these egregious laws that impede progress, that impede opportunity in education. Future Ed identified 118 private school choice bills in 34 states, introduced or pre-filed in 2024. Vouchers siphon money from taxpayers and public schools with little or no accountability and lack of transparency. But be mindful that vouchers have been consistently pushed. Does anybody know what year? Since 1954. Brown versus Board of Education. Look how long they stayed at it, y'all. They ever don't care how long he stayed at it. Just as long as he gets you in the end. The Freedom Foundation, which is a think tank that battles unions and democratic ideals through litigation. They spew out education legislation, and they raise up community activists. The Heritage Foundation, and I want you to remember this one, ALEC, A-L-E-C, the American Legislative Exchange Council. They employ over 6,000 people. Betsy DeVos is just one of the billionaire members. It's a conservative think tank. They recruit legislators. They help pay for those legislators to get elected. And many of our private sector companies, I didn't bring the list here, y'all, because y'all might stop shopping. They have representatives that actually draw up this legislation and hand it to those legislators. You can just look up American Legislative Exchange Council for your state and ask who the members are. You can go online and it'll show you. So that's who's controlling government. That's who's buying government. That's who's telling folk how to think. So we're getting further and further away from having organic people raised up, such as our new vice president to be and our president to be. And a lot of that has to do with, I was so glad to hear CNN talk about it the other day. I listened to all news, y'all. That darn dark money. I said, oh God, I was glad you got back to it. The dark money. How many more minutes do I have? Okay, all right. So I'm almost finished, y'all. So divisive laws like this one here in Georgia, I think y'all heard about the AP classes, African American advanced placement classes that finally many of us got pushed back, and the state school superintendent, which actually got more votes one time than the governor, and when we look at his expenditures or his money he raised, and it wasn't a whole lot of money, so where's the money coming from to get this man? But anyway, it's nothing but an extension of critical race theory, alarmist. It comes out of fear. A talk this morning I listened to driving over on NPR talked about the changing demographics in the country and the promise of America, which is about to become the promise of everybody. Not just for a few folk, not just for a few men, not just for a few elite men. Now, if I said that in the classroom today, they'll probably come and get me. I would say it though, because we want to talk about truth, right? So we're talking about everybody. And that promise is about to come about. So the critical race theory alarmists, which I had never heard of, a concept back in the 70s in grad school, all of a sudden they use that to say that, oh, you're making some people feel guilty. Well, I've been feeling guilty ever since I could ride up in Buckhead in some places and I can't live in no house. What about me? But anyway, I'm going off. And despite being banned by President Biden, that critical race theory stuff, over 600 efforts to resurrect the fact, and it's not a fact, the theory that this country history is not, it should be told a certain way, it exists. But there are real solutions. So here's the good news for our children and our communities. And I'm going to give you a handout at the end. These solutions address learning loss, loneliness, literacy challenges through transformative strategies that can be sustained, integrated, and scaled to help children recover and thrive. We realize such by fighting and standing for joyful and confident readers, not banning books, y'all, expanding community schools, providing all children the opportunity to learn by doing via experiential learning, real world and life skills, careers and technical education beyond walls, with hands-on experience at its core, furthering our care for our children and families' mental health and well-being by demanding that social media companies, for instance, protect and not prey on our children, and that our families, not just our children, but our grandparents and their neighbors have not just adequate Medicare, Medicaid, but advanced. Going a little further, but we can afford it. Fighting for investments in schools need to be raised so they can recruit and retain and respect the educators and school staff who help our kids thrive and offer a well-rounded curriculum and provide a safe, welcoming, and well-maintained school building. Schools are still the safest places for our children to be. And when we look at the billions of dollars that we spend in teacher turnover, my God, these strategies will strengthen and improve public education regardless of the zip code. And I have a one-sheeter over here that might break down for you further what I just said. In a retrospective look at 50 different studies, researchers found strong connections between family involvement and academic achievement, even if it's the grandmama, even if it's the foster care, whatever that family is defined as. So, support and involvement from educators and families are crucial to a child's academic and positive citizen contributions and a more rounded life. Most of us of the age when our neighbors would ask us what about our report cards. Our Sunday school teacher, or the man that helped my dad sometimes around the house, and my dad was somewhat of a carpenter, would ask, how you doing in school? So we knew that we had certain expectations. Now, I'm gonna hold up this, it's falling apart. You may not be able to see it well. Did everybody see a man in a picture? I'm gonna have it up here on this table. The man in this picture was from rural South Georgia. And there was very limited, if any, opportunities, and I'm gonna use that word, Negroes. The opportunity to attend the one-room schoolhouse was eclipsed by the landowner's demand there in Sandersville, Georgia, that young strappy boys be in the field planting during the spring, harvesting during the fall. Upon moving to the city of Atlanta in the early 1950s, he was a night laborer at the Atlantic Ice Company. Atlantic Ice Company was partially there on Edgewood Avenue and undeveloped underground Atlanta at the time. He learned to scribble his name when his eldest daughter, a high school graduate, taught him. He was in his 50s. He took his children to church, specifically Beulah Baptist Church. And he tied their church offering in tight handkerchiefs with buffalo nickels, which two of the children would take down to the store and buy cookies with. He taught his children to be givers, to be honest, to respect their neighbors, their teachers, to respect their teachers, and to love the Lord. He became a Mason. He received numerous block awards for the best kept lawn on his street, taught his daughters even how to mow the lawn. He was a carpenter, a counselor to all the kids in the neighborhood, raised dogs, taught his daughters how to ride a bike. But he was an uneducated man by today's standards. But he was a man of principle. He was a husband and a part-time mom who didn't mind cooking and shopping when his wife, who was the mother of his children, in order to make ends meet, was picked up by what we called then her white folk on Sunday evenings and returned to the family on Friday evenings. He was a husband who did not mind doing those kind of duties. A man who was among thousands in the civil rights movement, lived about 10 miles from Auburn Avenue. He was a civil rights activist. A man who was also tragically killed in 1968, the year of our Lord. This man introduced the acronym SCLC to the little girl in the picture. He walked and talked righteously, a better life, and he believed, for the kids in Atlanta's Edgewood neighborhood. And he ardently listened to Chuck Huntley and David Brinkley via a big tube black and white TV. Looked forward to the 6 o'clock news. And on Sundays, when his wife was home, and before she went back out for the week, they would listen to comments on Meet the Press, and the children would hear them. They would sit on the porch in the evenings and discuss the events. His youngest daughter, the little girl in the picture, was 1 year of age. This picture was taken in 1957, the year that the SCLC was born. He wanted her to become a teacher. He taught his students, we were his students too, his children, that next to the Bible, that the vote was sacred. And I could see he and Mom picking up neighbors in their 1963 Impala, taking them to vote. Sometimes kids in the car and sitting on those finger hut plastic coverings on the seats. So today, I am honored by my father, Ralph Turner. The little girl in this picture is me. So in the spirit of, I'm gonna try not to cry. I'm so honored to be here. In the spirit of, and on the shoulders of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, activist Bayard Rustin, Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowry, which I performed my sister's wedding, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, in honor of my parents, my first and best teachers, to President Steele and his wife and the board of the SCLC. It is our charge, our mission, our purpose to continue the work for the full equality of all Americans, to tear down the door and any board corner barriers that hinder the realization of the promise of our country and opposes through any doctrine, platform, or law that hinders what we believe in. That these truths be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our public schools are one of our nation's treasures and fundamental institutions to that end. Let us not be weary in well-doing. Let us continue the work of the great SCLC and our fathers and mothers before us, regardless of where we came from, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of everything that Satan is trying to divide us on. We must do it for the glory of our Savior, the Christ. And in the name of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, I am humbled, honored, and privileged by you today, and I hope that I was able to serve you. God bless us all and be with us. Thank you. And by the way,